Tommy was a regular kid. He played Little League baseball, he played football. He loved to fish and loved to hunt and play in the outdoors. He was just a regular suburban Chicago kid. Tommy was most passionate about his family. He loved his family, and he loved having a family and being involved with his cousins, and he comes from a pretty large group anyway. I think his second passion, or most important one to him, was hunting and fishing and being in the outdoors. I remember going out fishing with him in July, just before he deployed to Iraq, and where nobody was catching fish. Tommy stuck his hand in the water and swished it around and said, "I think we'll go with yellow today." And he put a yellow rubber worm on his line, cast it out, and got a fish right away. We have a place in Michigan, and we'd go up there from every weekend during the summer. Tom started water skiing was the fun part, and he'd just keep getting on the water skis and falling off and getting back on them and falling off. And I kept telling him, are you getting tired? And he'd say, "No, I'm not tired, I'm not tired." You could just see he was tired. He wouldn't quit. And then he always wanted to do one thing more. He'd go on, you'd pull him around the lake for the whole day. By the end of the day, he'd want to do one more turn or one more flip on the wakeboard or something like that. He was so determined when he was a kid. It was just part of his nature. It was always that way. He loved being a Marine from the time he was 6 years old till he enlisted. That's all we saw in his room were pictures of Marines and the swords and the dress blues, and he loved his Marines. I think he felt like he needed to be there. He needed to do something, give back to the country. You hear that so often, and it's a cliche to a lot of people. You'll hear people say that I wanted to be there, it was my turn. Tom really meant it. He really felt like he should be there. It was his duty to be in the service. It was his duty to be involved in it. I think he liked the camaraderie. He liked the guys. He liked the regimentation of it. He was so proud when he graduated from boot camp. I know he and I were both crying when that happened. He was just so proud of being a Marine. But I think he really did feel a need to be there. He felt like he had to. It was important to him. He wrote a lot about the people over in Iraq and how this generation may be lost, but the children of Iraq were important. He said he could see in their eyes that they didn't want this and that someday their world would change. He felt that that was the generation. The little kids today are the ones that'll make the biggest difference later. He felt good about that. He felt good about being there. I think his main concern was the guys, his fellow Marines, the ones he was with, and making sure that they were okay, that they were well taken care of. He said he'd never leave them. He didn't have to deploy on this deployment, but the group of Marines that he hung around with were all going, so he had to go. He said he wasn't going to let them go without him. I feel bad for all the parents. I know I'm not alone. You see a lot of people that are all suffering. They all hurt. I hope there's something good comes out of all of this. I hope that the purpose that we're in Iraq is, I hope it all works. I hope we have a peaceful time sometime in our lifetime. I was proud of the son that I had. I was proud of the way he had turned out. He was respectful, never gave us any trouble. I think I probably had to yell at him a couple of times when he was young, but he was just a good son. He was good to his mother, he was good to his sisters, and he was my friend. He and I were close that way. Just before he deployed, he told his mother that he wanted me to be his best man at his wedding, but he didn't know if that was legal, so she told him it was. But we got along good. Everywhere I went, Tom went. Whenever I went hunting or fishing, Tom went with me. We were just close that way. I just miss talking to him. I tend to talk to him at quiet times when I'm by myself. But I wish he'd answer. I wish I could get to him. I wish I could have him. I wish he could see all the love and affection that his family has given him. All of his uncles and cousins and aunts. The outpouring has been so phenomenal. He'd probably be embarrassed by most of it. He'd probably be telling us not to cry anymore and not to be upset and just to get on with our lives. I just miss him. I miss having him around me. He was a good friend.
Byron was just, had a real electric personality. He's really funny and he had a great laugh, great smile. He could carry on a whole conversation in movie quotes. And I think that was probably one of, just my favorite things to do with him is just tell jokes and laugh. And he was just a real character, just a crack up. He loved to do practical jokes on people, and we had taken a family trip to Colorado one year with another family who lives there, and our family we had decided to hike up Pikes Peak. And so this was when Byron was probably around 9 or 10 years old. So we all started hiking, and at some point, some of the small kids started to get tired and cranky. And so the two moms and most of us came back down to the car. But both of our dads and Byron continued to hike and said we'd be down later. Well, it started to get a little dark, and we kind of were starting to get worried, and we hear them coming through the woods. But as they come through the clearing, both the dads, my dad was carrying a stretcher made of 2 sticks and T-shirts wrapped across, and Byron's laying on the stretcher with his legs splinted, screaming. And of course, we all take off running for him, but the closer we got to him, a big smile broke out on his face, and he was laughing, and I will just kind of never forget that as long as I live. It was just hysterical and probably one of my favorite memories. He really liked to sing and kind of go out and dance. We've lived in Texas all our lives, and when he went out to Camp Pendleton, I think he was very proud. Us Texans are very proud of being from Texas. But he went out to California, and he never had really been, represented the typical what everybody thinks Texas looks like, which is cowboy boots and cowboy hat, until he went to Camp Pendleton. And then he was so proud, and for some reason he started to wear the cowboy boots, started to wear the cowboy hat, and listen to more country music. But he really loved to sing, and I can hear him, when we drive in his truck, I can hear him sing, and still today I hear some songs and I just hear his voice singing it. He knew from a very small age that he wanted to be a Marine. Both my grandfathers served in the Marine Corps during World War II, and he just knew that that was something he wanted to do. Our family grew up with a great sense of patriotism, knowing that it takes brave men and women to serve our country. I will never forget the day that he came home from boot camp, and my parents had picked him up at Camp Pendleton, and they'd come home, and my siblings and I had prepared this great, dinner and party welcome home thing for him. And when I opened the door, he was standing there in his dress blues, and I've just never seen him look, stand so tall. He seemed to have grown about 2 inches. And he was just a different person, almost. The same person, but so strong and so confident and so sure of himself. I remember when he left for Iraq the first time, and we hugged each other for the last time, and I said, you have to promise me that you're gonna come home. You have to promise. And he promised me. And so in every letter that I would write him, I said, remember your promise to me. Well, when he left for Iraq the second time, I said, "You have to promise me again, make the promise." And he said, "I can't, Kristen, I'm sorry. I can't promise you." And so I think he knew, not necessarily that he wasn't going to come home this time, but he truly knew the risks now. I miss his smile, I miss his laugh. I miss our family. Our family's so close. We were before and we still are, but there's a huge hole. And when we're all together, that hole is just so incredibly, painfully obvious. And it's also where we find our greatest comfort, being together. But we were a big family. There's 5 of us kids. And I was the oldest. And Byron was number 3, the middle child, which is so significant because that's how it feels, like the middle just has dropped out of our world. I just want America to know that these men and women who give their lives are not just a number. I get upset when I hear, the 2,000 and 3,000 mark seem to be this huge number for some reason. Or now, we're at 3,500 some odd. They're not numbers. They're families. They're husbands and sons and sisters and mothers and brothers. And they all are somebody's loved one. They had lives, they had families, and I want America to see us and truly understand the cost of freedom. It was really our loved one that made that ultimate sacrifice. They made the decision. They were the courageous ones, but we're the ones who have to live with it for the rest of our lives. And as proud of them as we all are, because I am so proud. I'm very proud to be Sergeant Byron Norwood's sister. But it's still extremely painful, and I don't know how to live the rest of my life without it.
Alan was most passionate about his family, his children first and foremost, and he had 6 brothers and sisters. And anytime he wasn't working, it was all about us and them. He was really outgoing, really rambunctious at times, a lot of fun to be around. When Alan wasn't working, which wasn't very often in the Army, we would go to the lake a lot. We were lake people. All of our friends would get together and we'd go hang out in a cove on the weekends. And then, of course, football season would come around and we never left the TV. We were great big Razorback fans. So every Saturday, it was our thing to do. We would hang out as a family in front of the big screen and call the Hogs. My husband worried about making sure that his soldiers were trained so that if something happened to him, they'd be able to do the job. Alan deployed the first time with the 1st Cavalry Division over there, and he was there in Baghdad during the first elections. And he called me that night and told me how good it felt to shake the hands of men who had voted for the first time in their life. And how wonderful it was to look in the eyes of women and just see the pride that they had in themselves and in their country being able to vote for the first time. And he would talk about the children and how he loved just interacting with them. He would talk about how their lives are so different than ours here. And he really felt like what he was doing over there was going to help them have the same opportunities that our children have. Alan Alan instilled a pride in myself and my children for this country and for the military that we would have never had without him. I've got a 10-year-old who is bound and determined to join the Marine Corps one day so that he can be like his dad. His personality was so loving and caring and patriotic. And that's almost rare in today's society. He loved this country. He loved the military, he loved his men, and he loved his family. The thing I take the most pride in is the fact that Alan was able to balance being a husband, a father, and a soldier very, very well. He always found ways to incorporate us into his work, and he was always able to incorporate his work into our family. We would have barbecues and we would take his soldiers to the lake, and he was able to build a camaraderie in his unit that I haven't seen very often in the Army. We became one big family, and Alan made that happen. The day my husband died was the day after Anna Nicole Smith died. I spent 3 days looking for something on the news about what happened in Bakuba that day. And all I heard about was what Anna Nicole Smith was going to wear when she was buried. And every once in a while, I would catch a little blurb on the bottom of the screen about how 3 soldiers were killed in Bakuba. And I think it's sad. I think today's society spends too much time focusing on things that don't really matter. We care more about what celebrities are doing than what our soldiers are doing, and it's sad. And that's why us military families stick together, because at times it does feel like we're the only ones that understand or even care. My son really misses his dad being out there on the field with him. Baseball season just started, and Alan was always there, and that's probably one of the hardest things. My girls are cheerleaders, and Alan used to help them do their stunts. They're gonna miss that type of interaction on the field with sports and the great big hugs, the great big bear hugs. My husband was a big man. His shoulders were so broad, and when he put his arms around them, he would just envelop them. And they're gonna miss that. The one thing I've realized I miss the most are his hands. And I know it's something strange that most people don't realize. When someone's gone, you don't get to feel that person's touch anymore. And I see pictures, and I see how he had these large, strong hands, and I always felt like I was safe. And I don't have that feeling of safety anymore. I don't have my protector.
One thing he always did was he remembered the family. And when he'd come home from his little trips, he always brought presents for us. There was always a package for us. And that was the way of him saying, you know, even though I was out of the country, even though I was gone, I thought of you and I was able to bring this back for you. He had his passions for just spending time just at home. Just being home was a big event, and he really, a lot of times, did not want to go anywhere. Just being with us was enough. he always, used the time so wisely to teach them lessons, and nothing was ever done without an explanation or a lecture. And especially his biggest lecture he would give my oldest son, at the time was 12, was he always talked to him about the importance of integrity. And so that's what I remember about my husband, was that Rich would always, the time he spent with the children was valuable time. He always took a job that nobody else wanted. We never said no to the Marine Corps. When we were given an assignment, we took it. We moved. And there were times he was sitting behind a desk that perhaps nobody else wanted, but he took it and he did the best he could, if not better than anybody he could. He ended up going to Baghdad, and he was the chief of SPA, Strategic Planning Assessment Team. And it was every day to him, he said there was always something new every day, a new challenge that was faced with. And from that, I think spending the almost 7 months there, he felt that he was able to actually make a difference in the counterinsurgency. I'm an audiologist, and I keep having to move, quit my job. And there were some openings with the Army Reserves. I said, I think I'm going to join the Army and do the reserves. And he said, no, you're not. And I go, oh, yes, I am. He goes, well, you tell me. Why would you join the Army Reserves? And I said, so I can have a retirement like you, since I'm always quitting my job. And he says, Viviane, that is not why you joined the Army. You joined the military for your country. And I realized, oh my goodness, I never thought of it that way. That's why he joined the Marine Corps. He wanted to serve his country. He had left me a love note one day, and it was so warming that I kept it. And the day he died, I went looking through my dresser and everywhere. I said, I found it. And it was basically to thank me for all I had done while he was in Iraq. He was always appreciative of what I did while he was gone that allowed him to stay away so much. But he signed it all. Your loving husband, always, until the end of time. What I miss most about having Rich is that, and I tell people, I work hard. And if I need anything done in my car, I get it done. If I need help with the house, I can do it. If I need to buy, clothes for the kids, everything can be bought. Or I can work, or I can do it myself. What I cannot do is replace the adoration he had for me. Even though he was not around, he always adored me. And even though I was alone, it didn't matter. I knew wherever he was, it was someone that adored me. That I cannot replace. I can't buy that. I can't make it happen.
Beth was absolutely amazing. She loved life. She loved the outdoors. She liked to bike and hike. She was very passionate about that. She was passionate about life in general. There's not one thing that I could put my finger on that I can say made me proud of her. It was the whole package deal with her. You felt alive when you were around her. She could make even the most serious times be funny. If it was quiet in the house, you went to look for her because she was into something. Beth was very inquisitive, and she had to know how things worked. She went through what was pretty much like the scientific method, And when she must have been about 2 years old, she went into the refrigerator and took out a dozen of eggs, and I have carpeting in my kitchen, and she lined them up on the carpet and then stepped on them. And the reason was she wanted to see how it felt to have the goo come between her toes. She had to know how things worked. She analyzed everything that she did. No decision by her was spontaneous. She weighed pros and cons before she made any decision. She knew she wanted to go in the Navy when she was in 9th grade. She told her father she wanted to join the Navy. And when she was in 5th grade, she told me she was going to study the ocean. And she did. When she was in high school, she was on the soccer team, and her and the coach didn't see eye to eye. And it was her senior year, and he turned to her at the beginning of the season, and he said to her, you know I'm not going to play you much because I don't like you. He says, so why are you here? And she says, just to remind you of that every day. And she'd show up every day for practice, and eventually by the end of the year, he was playing her. When she played field hockey in high school, and she would jump on her bike and travel 3 miles through the city to get to practice when she was 13. Nothing was going to stop her. When she was a senior in high school, they started a swim team. First time it was, she never swam. And she went out for the longest challenge. It's 26 laps of the pool. And I asked her why she did that, and she says, because it'll get me in shape, and I need to get in shape because the military says I have to be in shape. She was tiny, too. She was 5'2", weighed 120 pounds, but solid might. You didn't want to mess with her. She worked hard. She worked really hard, and she always expected the best from herself. And she was, I guess you could call her an overachiever. She turned to us in the middle of a crew meet, and she says, by the way, I'm going to Florida. I'm going into aviation. And we kind of looked at each other and said, where'd that come from? And she just laughed, and she says, oh, I knew this 4 years ago. This is what I wanted to do, but I didn't know if I'd get the chance. But she did get the chance to do the things she wanted to do. Anything she wanted to do, she did, or she tried. She set those goals ahead of her, and she just kept aiming towards them. She was great. I'm going to miss everything about her. Her hair, so soft. Her smile, infectious. I'd miss the way she looked at the world. She would calm me down and say, just take it easy, Mom. Beth was absolutely pro-country, pro-military, and that's the way she lived her life. She almost had an agenda for her life, and that's what she was living by. I guess I just want people to know that Beth was amazing, and she's a girl, and we usually think of the military being guys. There's girls out there, and they're serving their country, and they're doing it right next to the guys, and they're taking the same licks that the guys are getting.
Christopher was the center of every occasion he was at. He was always smiling, quick with the joke, quick with the sarcasm if it was needed. He was someone that people could relate to on many levels. He spoke easily with other people. He was a light in a room. He was a Boy Scout for years and years and years, and I don't think he ever stopped being a Boy Scout. His friends growing up were all part of the Boy Scout troop, and that's where it was his home. That's where he was comfortable. You could put him out in the middle of nowhere and he'd know what to do. He was that kind of guy. When Christopher decided to join the military, it really didn't surprise anyone. It was like a continuation of Boy Scouts. So it was just something he was meant to do. It was where he was comfortable. And Chris was in it for life. Chris was very much interested in history, military history, did very well in school. He was very book smart, but wouldn't let you know it. His passions were his kids and his work. Those were the two things. Family always came first with Chris. And he was good at what he did. He was good at defending his country. He was good at serving. He knew his job inside out and backwards and would do anything anyone asked of him. Christopher took every single minute with his children and treated it like it was the only moment. He would joke with them. He would laugh with them. He'd take them places. He loved taking them to the zoo or taking them hiking. When we lived in Colorado for a short time, we would go out to some of the rockier, like, hiking trails and things like that. And even when the kids were very little, he would make sure that they were seeing all the little things, like the lizards, and that they would see the plants that were blooming. And he was definitely an outdoors type of person. Christopher brought so much love to so many people. He touched so many people in so many ways. And I didn't realize how many people there were that were affected by him until after he was gone. There were so many people that came up to me and said, I knew him because I served with him on this deployment, or I knew him because he was in Boy Scouts, or I was his teacher. I was his mother's friend, and we'll never forget him. And it was always his smile. That's what everyone said. It was always his smile. That's what we remember most. With Chris, the thing that I miss most is being able to pick up a phone and call him. Christopher and I were best friends. He was a phenomenal father, a wonderful son, and anything at all we could talk about. He was there for me if it was 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and he had just gotten off of the world's longest deployment and he wanted nothing more than a shower and a bed. But if I had something that was totally trivial that I just needed to tell him, he was there for me. He was there for our kids.
Stephen was your best friend from the minute you met him. He'd do everything that he could to make you comfortable, to, just here's this, here's that, make yourself at home, and you'd feel like you've known him all your life. Any holiday came by, anybody that didn't have any family or anybody that lived in the barracks, he wanted them to come by and know that they had a place to come for Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, whatever. And, not just come for the meal, stay for the whole weekend until you have to go back to work the next day. Stephen's favorite thing to do was camping. And I've never gone camping in my life until I married him. He loved to fish, he loved to hunt, and that's why we moved to Alaska. He never caught, the salmon that he wanted. And he was just one day was just so frustrated that he jumped in the river. It was just funny, he had all his equipment to keep himself dry, but when he jumped in there and just dove on top of the fish, It's like, so what's the purpose of all this stuff to keep you dry if you're going to jump in the river and try and catch the fish like that? But, yeah, he loved all the outdoor stuff. We both joined because we thought it was our duty. We wanted to do, serve our country. And from day one, I mean, he's one of the most patriotic persons I had ever met. I mean, he was all about, honor and duty. I don't know if people know when it's their time, but before Stephen left, he made, looking back at stuff now, of course, I look back at all the things he did, things that I would normally argue with him about. I would say, no, we can't spend the money to do that. No, we can't do this. We shouldn't do that. We can't afford to do this. That I just let him slide for some reason too. And that was, him getting extra life insurance, packing all his clothes away, buying a new vehicle and putting all the insurance on those vehicles in case I die, it's paid for. Every little precaution that he took before he left. I'm very fortunate that he took care of us the way, in a way right now, he's still taking care of us. There's nothing out there that I want that I can't get, and it's all because of him. He took care of me, and he still is taking care of me and the boys like if he was here. And we just can't see him. I miss Stephen's presence. I miss, for me personally, I miss my best friend. I miss not having him to ask him, hey, do you think this is the right decision to make? What should we do with this,
Dan was cool to hang out with. He was a nerd, but yet he was a good nerd. He was the smartest person I ever met in my life. He changed my whole world around. We used to love to go dancing. We did everything. Horseback riding, swimming, whatever I can convince him to do, we did. He was just so much fun. We used to go camping. First time we went camping, I didn't want to go. And he made it so nice for me. He went and bought all these different equipment just so I could be comfortable. A tent with a stove inside of it, with a nice big cushion, one of those foamy beds, really spoiled me. And then he had to make sure that the campsite had showers and toilets. It was great. We just had a blast on everything that we did. Daniel was most passionate about me and the kids, and also the National Guard. He loved being in the service. Jennifer wants to follow in her dad's footsteps. She said, I want to be just like my daddy. Daddy was in the National Guard. I'm going to the National Guard. Daddy worked for Customs. I'm going to work for Customs. If Daddy worked in the police department, I'm working in the police department. Ben, he does not want to go into the National Guard. He wants to go into the Marines like his uncle. First time I met Dan, I was my sister's caretaker. She has MS, and I was cleaning her windows. And I saw Dan, and he was walking with two little rugrats, and I looked at him and I said, who's that? And my sister said, oh, that's my neighbor. And I said, really? That's my G.I. Joe. So my sister introduced us, and we became friends. And then he asked me if I'd start watching the kids, because he was a single dad at the time, and I started taking care of them, and one thing led to another, and I made him mine. Actually, I proposed to him. I said, hey, Dan, let's get married. And he said, you gotta be kidding, because he had been proposing to me in the past, and I kept saying, no, I wasn't ready. And then when I finally asked him, he couldn't believe it, until I had him go get me my ring. And then he was really surprised. I was like, oh my gosh, you really did mean it. I said, yes, absolutely. He knew he was protecting us. He knew. even though he didn't want to go and this was going to be his last year. He had like a few more months and he would have had his 20 years. And he said, as much as I love this, babe, I'm going to retire. I'm done with it. I want to be home with you and the kids. I've had enough. If you would have met Dan, he would have become your best friend right away. He could find a conversation with anything and everything. And everyone that he was surrounded with just really adored him. There was no one more special than Dan, and I'm sure you hear this from a lot of the other wives, but truly, you would have never met anyone like Dan. He was so honest and so compassionate, loving, just everything. Everywhere I look, I see Dan, everywhere. I'm gonna miss his touch. I'm gonna miss his kiss. I'm gonna miss his smile. I'm gonna miss a lot. He wasn't supposed to go yet. I'm gonna miss my best friend. I don't have anyone to talk to. He was my best friend. I could tell him anything in the world. And he never judged me. He never criticized me. He accepted me for who I was.
Growing up, Jeremy was really passionate about hunting, but it was always something involving, guns or some sort of sport. When Jeremy was, I think it was like 5 or 6, he got a set of cap guns, and so he was going around saying that he was a gun guy. And that's when he started developing his love for the military, and Jeremy eventually grew up and enlisted at the age of 17. When Jeremy first enlisted, it was wartime. There was always headlines in the paper, 2 soldiers killed here, 3 Marines killed here. So he knew the inherent risk in being a part of the service, but he did it anyway because, he thought he could do a lot of good there. Before Jeremy went into the service, he was a troublemaker. Got in trouble with the law. As a matter of fact, he almost didn't get a chance to serve because he had a little alcohol-related infraction. We talked to the judge, and the judge agreed to say, all right, we'll let him go because he's going to go off and serve in the military. And, some 3-4 months later, we go to visit Jeremy down in Georgia at Fort Benning, and all of a sudden he's got his head on straight. He knows what he's doing. And it just struck all of us, struck myself, my younger brother Nathan, my dad, that, this was really good for him. This is exactly what he needed. And, it was only a year and a few months after that he was killed. But, that entire time he was proud of what he was doing, and we were proud of what Jeremy was doing. When Jeremy first came back from basic training, he was just really proud to know how to make a bed in 30 seconds, how to eat a meal in less than 5 minutes. After he went off to Hawaii and was, serving with everyone, he started becoming more proud of, knowing how to fight. He was always trying grappling moves out on us. He was always just really proud of what he knew, and we didn't. He kind of held that over our heads. I think I'm gonna miss Jeremy's smile. He always had this crooked grin that may or may not come through, in what I'm doing. But it was always just off to one side. I'll never see that again. I'm gonna miss things like, growing up when I have kids, taking them over to Uncle Jeremy's house, and, they're gonna miss out on hearing all those stories of, when I served in Iraq and all that stuff. Instead, I'm going to have to take my kids to see Uncle Jeremy at his grave and tell him, what a great guy he was. He always knew the risk, but he always went ahead with the mission anyway. I mean, I've heard stories from guys that were in Jeremy's unit saying that he would throw a temper tantrum if he couldn't go on a mission because it was just so important to him that he was a part of it. He said that his one wish for this year was to stay alive in battle. Yet at the same time, his one wish for how to die was in combat. And I thought that spoke, volumes about the kind of guy he was. He didn't want to die an old guy, surrounded by his family. He wanted to go out in a blaze of glory.
Nate's personality, I guess you would say, was very unique in many ways. His friends recalled him as very dark and brooding, really quiet. His call sign they gave him, he was a pilot, was Chatters. It was an ironic call sign because he didn't talk very much, unless you were married to him. He was very philosophical, very intellectual. He read a lot of books, and we always had deep discussions. But he was a romantic at heart, but outdoorsy as well, and very much an athlete. So he was kind of a very well-rounded, all-around guy, and he'd give you the shirt off his back, and he'd always tell you candidly what he thought in a very tactful manner. He was just a gentleman's gentleman. My husband, Nate, he loved to do soccer for fun. Soccer was his passion, always has been since he was a little boy. And he did it all through college. He was actually helped create the team that they know today at Milwaukee School of Engineering. He carried that on through flight school. He not only played when he was in flight school, he also became a referee. So he refereed on his spare time, which they don't have much of. And as soon as he came out to Southern California, where we met, he played soccer there, and I spent many, many hours on the sidelines at his soccer games. So it was always there. That was definitely his thing, was soccer. Nate wanted to serve his country because he wanted to do something different. He came from an area where they didn't have a lot of military involvement, and he wanted to do something just sort of out of the box. He went to school for an engineering degree, and he'd always had a passion for flying. So he went and down to the recruiters, and he got a flight contract. So he went to flight school, he got helicopters, and so he was a Cobra Attack helicopter pilot, and he loved flying. Next to his family and basically God Country, Family and Corps, he loved flying. The thing that makes me most proud about Nate is he always followed his morals. His moral courage was amazing. If he had a belief, even if it wasn't popular, even if he knew he'd be given a hard time about it, he followed it, and he would tell you what he thought, and there was never a question. He was a man of great character, and that's essentially why I married him. I had no doubts on where he stood on anything, and he pretty much knew the same thing about me. So we had a very open, honest relationship. There's so many stories that are just amazing and unique with Nate. He managed to bring those things and create those moments. The most prominent was actually our wedding, and it was quite the surprise to me. He asked me on a beach in Carlsbad, and it was funny. He got down on his knees, like, "Would you marry me?" And of course, I said, "Yes, of course." And he's like, "Well, does Sunday work for you?" And it was Wednesday. I'm like, okay, yes, Sunday, we can do Sunday. He's like, "How about the Ranch House Chapel on Camp Pendleton?" It's a very historic chapel. "Yes, we can do that." He's like, "And I hope you don't mind the generals marrying us." "Oh, okay." And so it was quite the surprise. I couldn't believe it, because most often it falls to the bride to handle all the arrangements for a wedding. And he'd pretty much done it all. He said, "All you have to do is show up." The only condition is that he wanted me to wear a white dress, because I threatened to wear my uniform, and I outranked him at the time. So he's like, "Please, Lisa, just find a simple white dress, any dress. I don't even care. Just a white dress. Just don't show up in your uniform." I was like, "You'll see when the double doors open." So I kind of left him hanging, and sure enough, I did find a dress. And in 4 days, we had the wedding cake, the professional photographer, the decorations, beautiful flowers, and it turned out perfect. He would set up special occasions or a little trip. He would pack my suitcases, and because he knew what we were going to do when we got there, but it was always a surprise for me. And he wanted every moment to be special, and we'd do every little thing together. He said, I don't want to waste a moment apart from you. If it means running an errand, we'll do it together, just because having you there and holding your hand and talking to you is more than anything he'd ask, because he knew he was deployed all the time. He's like, so I want to cherish every moment, and that's how he lived his life. He adored Alex, and he loved talking with Alex and big concepts. It was never just something simple. They would talk big concepts, and they would talk anything from like religion to space. He always had some deep thought to talk with Alex about, and so I think Alex will probably miss that the most, and probably remember that the most. We were always together. We could spend 24 hours a day together and be completely happy. Somehow he made every moment so special without even trying, and the big days he made incredibly special with surprises, and it was unbelievable. I think in that sense we were very much the soulmates. So just every moment special, every breath, every thought. And if I could capture them and never forget them or never let any memory fade, it would be the dream of my life until I get to see him again.
My brother John was always the crazy guy, the fun guy. You never knew what he had up his sleeve. You never knew whether he was going to come up behind you and get you, or you just never knew what was going on. He was the funny guy, but he was always quiet about it. He was the sneaky funny guy. And I just always remember he always had a goofy smile on his face. When John and I were stationed in Iwakuni, Japan, his major, captain at the time, Major Hackett, was his favorite person to pull pranks on. And Major Hackett had a thing that no one was supposed to clean his coffee cup or mess with his coffee cup. So my husband, of course, had to mess with the coffee cup. He would clean it, he would leave it laying around, he would hide it. So one day Major Hackett had enough and said, "Get in here." So John went into his office. "Do not move my coffee cup again. That is an order. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." So my husband stayed late after work, and John proceeded to super glue Major Hackett's coffee cup to his desk. And then, so Major Hackett came in the next morning, and he went to pick up his coffee cup and couldn't. So then he went to pick up his phone and couldn't. And he went to move his keyboard and his tennis shoes that were on the floor, and my husband had actually super glued everything on his desk down. And of course he got a little yelling, but later Major Hackett just thought it was funny. John's first car was this purple Firebird. And he was so proud of his Firebird. He was gonna fix it up, but it was in pretty bad shape when he got it. And we had no air conditioning, no heater. The windshield wipers didn't work, and John drove us back and forth to school. We always had to take blankets in the winter to wrap around us in the back, and we had to leave the windows down when it rained because the windshield wipers didn't work, and he had to stick his head out the window sometimes. And I just remember riding in the car with the very loud heavy metal music going. I think I have hearing damage from the rides to school. He loved tattoos, and he's actually given me a tattoo, and I love it because I got it from him. And my parents aren't the biggest tattoo fans, so we would kind of secretly discuss this tattoo. And then when everybody would go to bed, we would go down into my mom's studio and work on the tattoo. It took us like 4 days to give me this tattoo, but it was just really funny because we were both the sneaky ones that were always getting in trouble anyways, and we were down there, and we're grown, and we're sneaking in my parents' house doing a tattoo. He went to see his brother graduate from Marine Corps boot camp, and he came home. We were high school sweethearts, and he said, "Honey, that's what I want to do. I want to be that." And he said, "I feel called to be that, to protect our country, to serve the people of the United States. He said our country is great because of men that serve.
I think John felt like he was protecting the United States and his family, including his children and his brothers and sisters and mother and father. And I think that that's what was important to him. I don't think he would have been happy doing anything else. And I think that made him feel very good knowing that he was protecting us and the rest of the United States.
John was proud of his country. He loved this country. He loved his family. He loved his kids. And he wanted to keep this country safe. And he wanted to, protect the freedom that we've been given.
He didn't have to do his job. He did it 100%. He was very proud of it. And it wasn't an easy way to have employment. It was something he wanted to do and loved doing.
He put it best when he told me this story, was he was disarming a IED in the backyard and of a little home. And he had to get up on the roof to see this IED. And he heard giggling. And he looked around and there was a little Iraqi boy that was about 8. And he was playing peekaboo with my husband over the rooftop. And this little boy thought it was hilarious. I mean, here's this big Marine on his roof. And probably not something he saw every day. And so he played peekaboo with him for 5 minutes. And my husband was pretty intelligent, had learned a little Iraqi, and shooed him away, told him it was dangerous, and proceeded to disarm the bomb. And when he told me that story, he said, that's why I'm here. That little boy reminded me of our son. And he said, I'm here so little boys can play in their backyard. When my children think of their dad, I think of John, they'll think of bike rides, going to the park, wrestling with him in the living room, and of making rock music videos to Pantera and Slayer and numbers of hard rock videos. And he would set the camera up and be right in the video with them.
I'm proud of John for the man that he was. He's the type of man that most women dream about having for a husband. He loved his kids. He was loyal to his wife, his kids, his family, this country. I'm just proud of who he was and how he lived.
I will miss John's smile. I will miss seeing the love in his eyes, because he never looked at me with anything but love. And I will miss him at every high school graduation and wedding for the rest of my life. But he will be there with me in my heart.
What I'm going to miss the most is that goofy smile. And that he never got to spend time with my husband, because they would have really enjoyed each other. And they had a lot in common.
What I'll miss most about John is his smile, his contagious laughter, the future of being able to watch our children play together, and the fact that he'll never see my son. My son will never get to wrestle with him. So many things.
What makes me most proud when I think of John is not the Marine. It's the husband. It's the father he was. Because he was an awesome dad. And that's what makes me most proud when I look at our boys and our little girl and think of the wonderful father he was.